The day turned out to be a cheerful one, with a great arch of blue sky and a bright sun overhead. Not at all like yesterday, except for the men singing. Ellen liked to listen to the songs Grimsby and Gallup sang while they handled the sails and the tiller of the old boat. "Sing right up, boy," Grimsby called to her. "Oh, my name is Captain Kidd, who has sailed, he sang out. Ellen sang the refrain, who has sailed, who has sailed. At first she sang the refrains in a small voice, and then in a loud one, as she began to enjoy the sound of her singing, even though she didn't understand some of the words. They sang On the Banks of the Dee, and Yankee Doodle, and the Revolutionary Tea. It was exciting to sing Yankee songs as they sailed past British ships anchored near the shores of Staten Island. Ellen was standing by the mast singing at the top of her voice when their scow sailed up the East River and wound its way among the boats that were anchored there. Snow lay white on the rooftops of the gabled houses, and the sun glinted from the church spires. "New York looks good," she said to Grimsby, and she meant it. Grimsby and Gallup waved to her as she hopped off the boat. She staggered about the dock until she got used to walking on land. While they stood and laughed, then she took off her cap and waved to them. Soon she was running along the street and pushing her way through the crowds. They were the same crowds as yesterday, the same noisy men with wheelbarrows, and the same rowdy boys, and the same grumbling workmen with heavy loads on their backs. But she felt different. She wasn't afraid of them. They were all going about their affairs, just as she was. She ran in and out of the crowds, laughing to herself. She wasn't a rabbit anymore. She felt like singing as she climbed up the steps and burst into Grandfather's shop. She pushed past 2 British officers and past her grandfather's shaver, Alexander, who had a big bowl of soapsuds in his hand. She was so happy to be home. She would have smiled at the leeches if she had thought to. Grandfather's face lighted up when he saw her. Rising from his couch, he hopped after her to the kitchen and locked the door behind him. "I did it," Ellen cried in a loud whisper as she kicked off her shoes and danced about the room. I did it. She grabbed her mother's hands and they whirled around together while Grandfather waved the crutch the carpenters had made him. He would have danced too if he had had 2 feet. Over and over they hugged her and said, "We're so happy you're home." Pulling chairs up to the big table by the window, they sat down to hear about her trip. "You found the farmers' boats without trouble?" Grandfather asked in a whisper. "Trouble?" Ellen groaned. "I had nothing but trouble all day long." Mother and Grandfather looked at her in surprise. They could hardly believe the whispered tale she told them. Perth Amboy was filled with cannon and wagon trains and hundreds of soldiers, said Ellen. Mr. Shannon told me that General Cornwallis was there in Perth Amboy getting ready to finish off our army before winter sets in. "That's what we feared," said Grandfather gravely. "But did you get the message to Mr. Shannon? Didn't you?" "Yes, I did," said Ellen, "and now I understand why it is so important for couriers to take messages to our army." "I had no idea it would be so hard for you, Ellen," Grandfather said. "I don't know whether I would have sent you had I known, but I myself never would have been able to get through the lines at all. No one would have smuggled a fat old man on a boat." His eyes twinkled. Mother leaned across the table and smiled at her. "I'm proud of you, Ellen," she whispered, "but I hope you'll never have to do it again." "Well," said Ellen as she thought that over, "I think maybe I'll do it again. I don't know. I guess I'd do it again if the boat was sure to go to Elizabethtown." It seemed to Ellen that 2 good things happened to her after her trip to New Jersey. The first happened the next morning when she wrapped her red cloak around her and went to the pump early. Ellen took her place at the end of the line to wait her turn. The women were still talking about the high price of food and the high price of firewood. It seemed to Ellen she had been away 100 years, and they were still talking about the same old things. Then Dicey came by. Her face grew red with anger when she saw Ellen. "Are you here again?" she cried as she walked slowly, heavily toward Ellen. Yes, I'm here again. Ellen put down her bucket. She was ready to duck out of the way if Dicey came too close. But she was not afraid of her. She folded her arms across her chest. Dicey growled, I told you not to come here, Miss Fine Lady. Ellen thrust out her chin and stared back at Dicey. This pump is near my house, she said calmly, and I intend to use it, no matter what you say. Dicey stared back, but she came no further. For almost a half a minute, they stared at each other. Then Dicey shrugged and turned away. You're just lucky I'm not ready for a fight, she called over her shoulder, but she walked away. The second good thing happened a month later. Grandfather's silver snuff box came back to him by way of a secret courier. In it was a message that gave them wonderful news. General Washington's small army had crossed the Delaware River from Pennsylvania to New Jersey on Christmas night and had taken the city of Trenton by surprise. Washington had been able to plan a surprise attack because he had learned so much about the British plans from the patriots in New York and the couriers who carried their messages. Then he and his army had moved on to another victory at Princeton early in January and had time to fortify winter headquarters in Morristown behind the Watchung Hills in New Jersey. And there was news of Ezra Toliver. He was a sergeant now and was safe and well in Morristown. They hugged one another for joy when they heard that. In the snuff box, there was also a folded piece of paper marked for Toliver. To Ellen's surprise, she found inside a tiny silver locket. She never knew who sent it to her, but since she didn't know, she liked to pretend it was from the general himself. And who knows, perhaps it was. And that's the end of our story, Toliver's Secret. I hope you enjoyed it, third graders. I thought it was a great book, and I really enjoyed reading it to you.